Tuesday update on Strange Love, the 21st of November 30. For more updates, please don't forget to subscribe. The episode starts with Indrajeet taking unconscious Shlok in his car. He says your work has ended. Here. You has scared Barkha and made my work easy, so thank you. He sits in the car. Aastha is in her room and cries, being scared. She wipes her tears and calls Indrajeet, but his phone is unavailable. Aastha thinks Shlok is after her and gets worried. Apsara tells Rekha that it seems Shlok has brought Aastha. I will go and decorate their room. Indrajeet comes in his car. Everyone looks tensedly. Indrajeet takes out Shlok from his car and make him rest on the road. Everyone rush to him and asks what happened. Indrajeet tells that he is just unconscious now, but if he continues to follow my wife, then end will not be same. Shlok gains consciousness and wakes up with pain in his head. Apsara and her husband ask about him. Apsara tells him that Indrajeet threatened to kill him. Shlok recalls Aastha hitting him on head. Apsara's husband asks how you will fight with Aastha, whom you love so much. Shlok goes without saying anything. Indrajeet comes back home and asks Aastha to open the door. Aastha opens the door. Indrajeet asks Barkha, are you alright? Aastha says Shlok entered the house and tried to take her forcibly. Indrajeet says he is not here. I have filed a police complaint against him and he will be soon arrested. He says he will spend as much time as possible with her. Aastha hugs him. Indrajeet looks evilly. Apsara tells Shlok that she can't see him in pain and says you are a friend for me. He says you are a winner. You can't lose your strength. She talks sweetie and says we will not back off when we are getting a chance to help you. We will help you get Aastha. She asks him to say what they shall do. Shlok looks on. Jyoti makes the baby sleep in the cradle. Sid comes and asks what are you thinking? Jyoti says, we shall meet Kalindi Kaki. She might forget her anger seeing our son. I will think that our son got his Nani's love. Renuka asks her not to take her grandson anywhere. Sid asks what is your problem with Kalindi Kaki. Sid tells Jyoti that they will go tomorrow. Aastha gives chocolate milk shake to Mishti and Shantanu. He tries to remind her of the promise. Aastha asks what? Indrajeet comes and says you have promised, but didn't fulfill. Mishti says you had promised us to bring pizza. Indrajeet says kids are insisting, so we shall bring. Aastha agrees and asks them to promise not to eat outside food for the next 15 days. They promise. Riya makes fun of her father-in-law's snorings. Renuka says you shall not say that. Sid teases Riya. Jyoti brings tea for them. Riya says, you shall think a good name for baby. Sid says we have named him Babu. Riya says she didn't like it. His friends will tease him in future. Sid says what we shall name him. Everyone suggest different names. Riya suggests Abhay. Renuka likes it. Sid and Jyoti are shocked. Sid looks at Jyoti and tells Renuka that you knows well. Riya asks why? Jyoti says she don't want to see her past. Renuka says it is her ex-husband's name and tells her that you can't change your past. Sid argues with Renuka and praises Jyoti. She goes to her room. Riya apologizes to Sid and says she didn't know that Jyoti's ex-husband name is Abhay. Sid says it is okay. Apsara keeps an eye on Indrajeet's home. She calls and tells him that Aastha didn't come out till now. Aastha gets ready. Indrajeet praises her and says I am lucky as if you gave me 2 kids. My happiness is because of you. He says he will take out the car. Jyoti cries hearing Renuka's words. Sid comes and consoles her asking her to forget the past and not worry. Sid says she knows, but her past comes in front of her eyes. I was not thinking about it, but today. She hugs him. Jyoti says it is because of you, I am independent and taking breath freely. Sid asks her to forget about today happening. He says if he comes in front of us, then also we shall not care. Unless I am with you, I won't let him harm you. Jyoti smiles and hugs him. Apsara sees Indrajeet and Aastha leaving in the car. She thinks Indrajeet shall not go with Aastha. She wonders what will happen now. Indrajeet and Aastha leaving in the car. Apsara sees this and calls Shlok. Shlok is in other car waiting. Apsara informs him that Aastha went with Indrajeet and his kids. He says thanks, your work is over, leave. From there, Shlok asks Rekha is she ready. She says yes, and asks him to drive. Shantanu tells Aastha that he will have ice cream first. Aastha says fine, and asks Indrajeet to take the kids, she will wait in the car. Mishti asks shall we go home? Aastha says no, I will sit here. Indrajeet says fine, I will take them. Shlok looks on as Indrajeet, kids and the driver go to the ice cream stall. Shlok says this is the right opportunity, and he gets down towards the car. Indrajeet comes back, and they leave in the car. Shlok calls Apsara and says Plan B. Aastha tells the kids that they will go on a long drive. Indrajeet says he can't say no to her and the kids. Shlok follows them. Apsara calls Indrajeet saying she is from DMC and says she sent some officials to his office. He calls office and comes to know about DMC people coming there. He tells Aastha there is emergency in office and leaves taking taxi. Shlok stops the car in front of Aastha's car and kidnap her. The driver and the kids are shocked. Aastha asks who are they and sees Shlok in the mirror. She asks you here. Rekha shuts her mouth. Shlok asks Rekha to tie the cloth. Shantanu asks driver to call dad. The driver tries calling and says his phone is switch off and takes kids home. Jyoti and Sid come to meet Kalindi. Kalindi acts rude to them and goes inside. The man tells Indrajeet that the people came and they left also. He gets puzzled and says strange, something fishy about this. Jyoti asks, how can she not meet her? If she regarded her daughter, she lost her AAI also, she will never come back. Kaki please we all lost our loved ones, we should be together in such time. Anaya got a brother, and I got a husband like Sid because of you. Bless my son, I will think I got blessings from my mum. What's my baby's mistake in this? Open the door please. Kalindi cries. Jyoti says, fine, if you will not come out, I am adamant, my son will not go from here without your blessings. She says she is going, and leaves the baby there. She asks Mala to let the baby cry. If Kalindi does not care, then let it be. She says when the family was against me, she supported me by lying to her daughter, and today she is not blessing my son. Shlok brings Aastha home and he thanks Rekha. He says Indrajeet will come chal first, when he knows, go from here for few days. Rekha refuses. Shlok says he will show the truth to Aastha. Aastha sees her pics with Shlok all over the place. Shlok says Aastha, this is the truth, you are my Aastha. Kalindi stops Jyoti and takes her son. She asks the name. Sid says we did not do Nam Karan. Kalindi says she is blessings the baby as it's not his mistake, but she will not love her, as she reminds her of Aastha. Shantanu says he will call dad. Indrajeet gets his call. Shantanu cries at home and tells him that they have kidnapped mum. Indrajeet asks what, how. Shantanu tells everything and Indrajeet is shocked. Shantanu says I am at home. Indrajeet says take care of Mishti, I promise I will get your mum and come. He gets angry. Aastha says I don't believe this pics. Shlok says it's not made by Photoshop. This is our relation. It's true. How can you forget our love? He reminds her the situations. She says just stop it. This is not my memories. I am not in this. I am Barkha Indrajeet Sarkar. I can give up my life. But not believe you. I hate you. I will never let you succeed in your aim. Shlok is stunned. Tuesday update on the Insolent Heart, the 21st of November 30. The episode begins with Abir enters Mahar's cabin and says Nisar, it's a good opportunity, think on it, go grab a coffee and think over it. Nisar says okay and leaves. Abir says so yesterday at friends meet it was the CEO and a friend. And now you are back to your own self, trying to separate two friends. Mahar says don't give yourself importance. I did this bcoz. Nisar is talented and needs an opportunity. Abir says where was this nature when Nisar was jobless, and now when he is in my band you are doing this. Mahar says enough. Abir, everything is not always related to you, and don't forget you are not self-made. Don't forget D'Souza, he was one who taught you music. Did you forget him? Abir says what's wrong with him? Why are you dragging him now? Mahar says he is no more, and you know what his last wish was, to meet his student. That is you, but you didn't arrive. Mahar leaves. Abir goes to graveyard and sees D'Souza's grave and walks to it. He sits beside it and takes blessings, and Abir is very sad. Abir goes to meet D'Souza's wife. She says Elton D'Souza loved you a lot. He never missed any of her episodes. He was very proud of you. He would say he will live even when dead. Abir will keep him alive. He tried meeting you and calling you, but there wasn't any answer from her answer. I even called her office. One day I went hospital and met Mahar, and from then till now Mahar took care of us. And Elton said Abir did what was my dream. I am proud of him. Abir is emotional and asks for a glass of water. He leaves money with a note on table and leaves. Mrs. D'Souza reads the note where Abir says he is ashamed of his mistakes. PLZ, don't take this money wrong. Here is my number. I didn't keep my promise but will surely keep now onwards. Love, Abir. Abir on road looks at some guys playing guitar and remembers his old days, in a music shop, a D'Souza playing guitar and a kid answering to it through drums. Everyone applauds the small kid. D'Souza asks what's her name, kid? Abir's mom comes and says his name is Abir. Abir's mom says I am here for his love towards music. Will you PLZ teach him guitar? D'Souza says sorry, I don't teach. Abir holds his hand and says PLZ sir. D'Souza says okay, and Abir remembers how D'Souza sir taught him music and guitar. Abir's father scolds D'Souza and holds him the culprit for Abir's poor marks in exams, and says guitar won't take him to college, and soon Abir will fail with such performance. D'Souza says sorry sir, but Abir is really good. His music passion and knowledge will take him to stars. Believe me, he is genius. Studio and music is his life. Abir's dad says you will not tell me apt my son, so PLZ leave my son alone and leave this house. D'Souza feels bad and says before I leave I would say one thing sir. Abir's love towards music is devotional. You can stop me from teaching him but not him learning music. Abir's dad says enough, leave. Abir starts crying. Abir near D'Souza's grave sits near it and starts crying. Abir goes back to office. He is still in pain. He goes to recording room, takes his guitar and memorizes his teacher and plays guitar and remembers his teacher's lessons, and is in tears. Mahar enters and sees Abir in pain and feels bad and is in tears too. She walks to Abir and gives him coffee. Abir looks at Mahar. Mahar says take it. You will feel better. Abir takes the cup. Mahar turns around and walks in tears. She goes to her cabin. Abir enters her cabin and says, I am sorry I again didn't knock, can I sit? Mahar nods yes. Abir says, I made a huge mistake. The one who gave me means to live, I didn't take care of him, but you did, thank you. You know you are the last person I hate, but what all you did for Sir. It's a big favor for me and it can never be paid back, but I will try for sure. Thanks for everything. Abir leaves. Mahar in her house, lies on her bed and thinks of Abir and how in pain was he in studio and his words of thanking her. She goes to her cupboard and removes a violin. She plays the violin. Mahar in past college days trying to play violin. Abir says Mahar hold it properly and teaches her and asks her to be gentle with it. Mahar says stop disturbing me, let me try. At last Abir holds her and violin and teaches her how it is to be played. Mahar and Abir come close to each other and everyone clap for them. D'Souza Sir says Abir, this is fantastic, you teach very well. You know Abir, I was scared to teach at first in this college, and when I heard Abir is in this college I was so relieved. And so Abir, you will join me from tomorrow and help me teach these students. Mahar says, Sir, can I have some other teacher and not Abir? D'Souza says, Mahar, don't worry, he Abir is GRT in music, he is born genius. Mahar's friend says, you are so lucky Abir taught you violin. Abir comes and tells Mahar petrol prices and says, remember you asked me. Mahar says, this library stop disturbing. Abir says, you know people like me are genius and you bookworm. Mahar says, stop following me and be quiet. Abir says, do you remember what Sir said? Abir is born genius. Mahar in her room smiles and says, born genius. Mahar gets a call from Abir. She picks it. Abir says, two things you won't tell anyone in office, that I cried and you won't take advantage of this. You know I have rock star image and rock stars don't cry. Mahar says, okay, and next? Abir says, don't think that I cried so I gave up, our fight is still on, and cuts phone. Mahar says, so like a dog's tail. Nisar in office tells Mahar that he needs some more time. Mahar says, okay, you may, but still be a little quick, I have pressure from Sani Sir. Nisar says, I will surely tell soon. Mr. Sani and Mrs. Sani in office. She gives Sani boiled food and forces him to eat. Mahar comes and says, oh sorry. Sani says, come. Mahar plz, tell me good news. Nishi, Mrs. Sani says, don't get annoyed by him. Sani says, Mahar plz, hurry, see the 9 slot, what will I do with it, be quick. And Nisar, he didn't give any answer, how can you play such big risk with that, Nisar? Sani yells at Mahar. Abir comes to office and sees Tunno. He goes to him and hugs him and asks how come here. Tunno says, I have some work and need help and I don't want Mahar to see us. Abir says, OHK, come with me. Mahar sees Tunno and Abir together. Abir takes Tunno to cafe and asks him what he wants, money. Tunno says, no money, I want to become like you. I mean, I want to work with you. Mahar comes and says, Tunno, what are you doing here? Tunno says, I came to meet Abir. Abir says he came to tell me secrets. Tunno says, I am here to work with Abir. Mahar says, we will talk apt this in homecome. Abir says, I have opening in band, sister did it. How apt it, boss. Mahar says, Tunno, let's go, and takes him along with her. Abir follows them, and Mahar says, stop following me. Abir says, I need to go out, gore fresh air, and lift is only way to go out, and goes behind them in lift. In lift, Abir asks Tunno any GFS. No, beware, chose the right one. Or else whole life you know and headache. Abir starts irritating Mahar by playing mouth organ. Mahar and Tunno get out of lift and Abir follows them. Mahar's car comes and she asks Tunno to go home. Tunno leaves. Mahar goes back to office and Abir follows her. Mahar says, Abir, you wanted air, right? Abir says it's not tasty, will come later. Mahar says disgusting and leaves. In lift again, Abir starts irritating Mahar. The lift breaks down and Abir panics. Mahar starts smiling. Abir very scared tries calling but no range. Mahar says, Abir, relax, it will be fine. Abir says, don't smile. You or boss do something. Abir starts chanting Hanuman Chalisa and sits down scared. Mahar looks at him and smiles. Abir stands up. Mahar says, you still get scared in lifts. Abir says, you know it's phobia. The lift starts. Abir gets out of it and starts yelling at Jawahar. He looks at Mahar and says, it happens sometimes, stop showing teeth. Mahar starts laughing.